Yeah, Michaela, are you recording now? I don't think I was recording beforehand.
Yeah, I just started recording.
Okay, guys. So today we're gonna learn how to make noise from noise. Um, yeah. So I was originally gonna talk about like four papers, but then I read two of them, and then I realized I didn't understand the math. So we're just going over two papers today. So the first one is noise to noise. This is from 2018. It's a pretty old paper. All these papers are actually pretty old, but I think it lays down some pretty like helpful, I guess, to me at least, interesting mathematical background. So this first paper, noise to noise. So the general idea is that we're going to be looking at like denoising, and one of the common metrics to use, or one of the common metrics to use when looking at denoising tasks, is this thing called PSNR. I really didn't understand like what this meant from ages on ages. So I had to look it up. So PSNR quickly is just the ratio of the max difference between like some clean image and the noise present within the image. So it just follows this formula. I think that this bottom formula where it says that PSNR equals 20 log max intensity minus 10 log mean squared error is sort of like the most appropriate. You see it like, so 20 log max intensity, that's going to be a constant for every single grayscale image that we really deal with, because max I is always just going to be set to 255. Um, so this number can really just go up to infinity, but we see that what we're basically trying to do is minimize this last term of basically, yeah, basically we're just trying to minimize mean squared error. This is the way of measuring how well we're doing that. That being said, take this with a grain of salt, because a lot of recent, I guess, understanding, or like from what I hear, PSNR isn't really, it has some problems with it, I guess, but it's still used, from what I can see, as the most common metric of determining how clean or how noisy an image is. Anyways, so yeah, like I said, Noise2Noise is a 2018 paper. Under like a traditional denoising scheme, you'd be taking a noisy image and you're going to try to map it back to the clean representation of said image. That being said, that's a pretty expensive process. Because I mean, how do you get a clean image? Usually for like, let's say you're taking like a long exposure photograph, you could be getting a clean image by taking a lot of noisy images and then taking the average of those and treating that as the clean image. But that's expensive. So what else can you do? Well, what Noise2Noise is saying is that under some specific circumstances, you can replace that clean image with a noisy image and treat it as the target. And the resultant model will be capable of denoising said noisy images. So the real meat of the paper is kind of just in establishing some mathematical reasoning. There's not really a novel like method that's introduced in this paper. Um, to give a quick analogy, suppose that you have a lot of like relatively noisy measurements for some numerical value, like let's say room temperature. The A common approach to finding like what the true value of this room temperature is to just take the average of all of these noisy measurements. Basically, that's very, very similar to what we're doing in ML, where we're just trying to minimize a loss function. So typically in ML, you can be dealing with different loss functions like L1 loss or L2 loss. Depending on what specific noise you're looking at, these different loss functions will have different use cases when we're um, using this noise-to-noise methodology. Um, so a noted problem, a lot of the paper tends to focus a lot on what happens under the case when we're looking at L2 loss or looking at Gaussian noise. So the tendency that I was talking about is that typically if you use L2 loss on some set of images from, like mapping noisy images to clean images, you're going to find that for every pixel, the I guess like optimal solution to what that pixel should be is simply the average of all of the inputs. So like if you have like, sorry, lost my thought. Okay. Anyways, um what this tends to cause is that like around images with, generally with images that have like edges, which is basically every image actually, it tends to cause some amount of like distortion. So what Noise2Noise does is it takes advantage of this by noting how this tendency for L2 optimized models, or this tendency that these models have, is used in a lot of real life tasks. For example, the long exposure images that I mentioned earlier, where it just takes a bunch of noise images and takes the mean of them. And it follows that if you take a clean image and then you add a lot of zero mean noise to it, the resultant mean intensity for any given pixel is just going to be the original signal, the clean image, plus the mean of the noise, which, because it's zero mean noise, it's going to be zero. So basically, what it's saying is that adding zero mean noise doesn't really do anything to what the model outputs. An extension of this means that if you take a bunch of noisy images that all follow some noise distribution with a mean of zero, then you don't even need the clean image in the first place. You can just basically substitute the clean image with just noisy mean, another noisy image. And because the mean is zero in the long run, this causes the model to like converge like the same set of parameters. So just to go over some of the experiments. So like I said earlier, a lot of the experiments done here are focused around using white or just some sort of Gaussian noise with mean zero and some variance. So looking at this first graph here on the top, this is mapping the level of, or I guess the PSNR of the denoised images as well against epochs. So what we can see here, if we just use white Gaussian, and white Gaussian means that we're adding not adding white noise. We're adding Gaussian noise with no interpixel variance between them. We see that the convergence between using just clean targets and using this Noise2Noise methodology doesn't cause any slowdown in how fast the model converges. If we add brown Gaussian noise, which is showing like interpixel, what is it called again? Some sort of relationship. If there is a relationship between the noise in between different pixels. So for example, like you could be adding instead of adding like a single dot of noise, you can be adding like Gaussian kernels of noise, like blotches, like shown in this image. We see that increasing the size of the I guess kernel for the noise tends to slow down the model as you increase the kernel size. However, it ultimately doesn't cause any decrease in the performance over time. In this table shown below, it's just showing that compared to some of the contemporary approaches that were used at the time, there was using this decision to use noisy data instead of clean data didn't cause any real degradation in the PSNR of the resultant image, and also outperformed other like non-ML based approaches like BM3D. These are some more pictures. Personally, I couldn't really see a difference between them because it doesn't help that my screenshot capabilities aren't that great. But yeah, this is just some more examples of the types of images that this method can produce. And as you can see, it's a very, very strong difference over just the noisy input image. So some of the more interesting experiments that they did involved sort of different types of noise. So for example, in this image of the lady, we're looking at basically just overlaying a bunch of multicolored text over this woman. And in the one on the bottom, this is sort of like a kind of like a variation of dropout, where there's a probability that the pixel at some given location is just replaced with some randomly generated like value from 0 to 255 and like a 3D image. So what these two experiments show in common is that you can't just use L2 loss here anymore, but that using different sorts of loss schemes that more accurately fit the type of noise that you're dealing with also leads to very, or I guess, similarly good results. So in this specific case with the sort of multicolored text, the correct answer here, with foreknowledge of the type of noise you're looking at, is that you should be using the mean. And as you can see, using the L1 loss, which tends to converge towards the median, leads to a significant advantage over using like just the L2 loss that we were describing earlier for Gaussian noise. And similarly for this example of, I guess, dropout. Although in that case specifically, that was because you have to use the mode. Yeah. So moving on from noise to noise. So one of the real inhibiting factors of the approach is that you have to have multiple images of the same target. So you can't just like, you know, take random photos. Yeah. And also the other constraint is that whatever object you're looking at has to be reasonably static. And in a lot of domains, this isn't really realistic to do. So for example, with taking like scanning scanning electron microscopy images, getting these images can be, I guess, pretty computationally, no, it can be pretty hard to get the, I guess, atom to stay still. So the solution to this, introduced in 2019, is this method called Noise2Void. So this one rests on two relatively, I guess, basic assumptions. The first being that whatever signal, and signal here means clean image. So whatever clean image you have, the pixels next to each other tend not to be independent from each other. And in most applications in the real world, this is a pretty reasonable assumption because objects tend not to just be like random like spikes and peaks in intensity. In addition, the noise should be independent from each other. So for example, this wouldn't work on the Gaussian noise examples that we were looking at previously in Noise2Noise. But yeah, so the real benefit of using Noise2Void is that all the noisy pairs are generated from a single set of images. So now, or rather, a single image. So now there's no more need to take multiple photos of the same thing. So the paper tends to model an image as, like I said earlier, a signal plus a noise. Yeah, and very similar to Noise2Noise, the expected value for such noise is expected also to be 0. So Noise2Void kind of extends the methodology explained in the previous paper by taking taking a pair from a single image. So the way that they tend to do it is that, or okay, yeah, no marker. Anyways, whatever. So typically, yeah.
You clarify, you said earlier, Noise2Noise doesn't need, or said Noise2Void doesn't need multiple images, but
Yeah.
What part of
Well, you're mapping a noisy image to a noisy image.
was the image?
To a noisy image of the same thing. So like if I take a picture of like Jason and it's really bad, I take multiple photos of Jason to try to find what Jason actually looks like. Thanks, Steve. Yeah.
But if there's any sort of application for like companies that manufacture cameras and try to embed software like Noise2Noise into them, because sometimes the shutter speeds can be like as fast as 1/8,000 a second. Like theoretically, you could get 4 to 5 images in like 200th of a second, relatively, high low shutter speed, and you could theoretically run that computation. It's just that it's so intense that you'd struggle to do it on a mobile device.
I don't know about that. I haven't looked into like the applications of these.
And the results are like really impressive.
Yeah, I think that I've previously looked at these papers before. I think that there are still some images with like details. Like you can't see in those images so early because they're just bad. I had to take like believe like small photos from my computer, but there's some issues with them. Yeah.
So you clarify, multiple pictures and multiple parameter pictures of the same, or is it multiple pictures of different types of?
Multiple pictures of the same object, and they don't really consider any image to be, I guess, perfectly clean. So the general idea is that if you're going to take multiple photos of the same thing, it's going to result in different noise patterns that are all drawn from the same distribution. So what you're trying to do is just try to, I guess, estimate what that distribution is. And actually, no, that's wrong. They're not estimating what the distribution is. But you have to, yeah, you have to take multiple photos of the same thing. Okay. Sorry, I was talking a bit fast. If there's any questions, just raise your hand. So to return to noise to void. So the implementation, or I guess the idea of implementation, that you have a single image. Oh. That if you take a single image and it's a grid or whatever, and it's whatever intensity values at any given point within this grid. So let's say you're focusing on specifically, you want to ask yourself, oh, what is the value within this grid? Basically, what you do is you take a patch around that. You take any one of the cells within this patch, and you take it and you just replace it in here. And then from that, you shuttle through the model and you try to map this noisy patch back to itself. So basically trying to map this, or basically trying to map this one or this cell back to this cell. So to return back to why this works, recall that we're treating an image as, or treating a cell within an image as a value of S, which is the clean signal plus a value of N, which is some noise. And then recall that this, the expected value of whatever noise on average is expected to be 0. So if you, over multiple iterations, what you're going to find is that this tends to approach the, what is this? This tends to approach the average value of all of the pixels, or all the clean, what is it called? All of the clean values for signal within the grid, plus like the average value for noise. But this is assumed to be 0 because we're dealing with zero mean noise. So what ends up happening is that this cell will approach the expected value of all the images, or all the values within this grid. And this, with the assumption that a lot of these, the services that we're looking at tend to be like, I guess, monotone and how they monotone intensity value, in the sense that like you're looking at flat objects, not objects that like kind of like look like this. This approximation will be very similar to the clean signal that we're trying to look for. Any questions? I don't know how good that came out. No? Okay. Yes, it's the same task. Yeah, and just to kind of reiterate, I guess in my notes I kind of noted that this process is very similar to just doing like bilinear interpretation. So yeah. No? Okay. Yeah. So in implementation, using this approach is kind of slow, because I mean, for every single pixel within an image, you'd have to like draw its own separate patch. So in implementation, they sped this up significantly by, instead of treating it sort of like at a pixel level, they would take patches of the image, like 64 by 64 patches of the input image, and then have a hyperparameter n mask out n number of those cells with whatever is left, and then basically use that same approach, shove it through the model, and then for the position of the masked pixels, they would just propagate that loss backwards. So yeah, just to take a look again at the experiments, it's very similar to the results that we get for noise to noise. It leads to a slight decrease in performance, but yeah, pretty comparable. Just to talk briefly about the other paper that I want to look at. I was going to look at a paper called Noise to Noise itself. Yeah, and that one. Huh. Actually, never mind. Anyways, that's all I prepared. But yeah, thank you guys. I made these slides half an hour before I came here, by the way.
Just augmenting the data with it's just augmenting the data with like replacing the pixel and map names, right?
That was a lot of. You can do that. Like a lot of the experiments here were synthetic, where they take clean images and then add noise to them. I didn't talk about these, but like for example, like Noise2Noise also worked with just like real like cryo EM images, I think. Yeah, it works with like just real EM images as well, but it's not necessarily just a data
But there's
augmentation.
some backbone model. Like different ways after you.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah. We good? Okay, cool. All right, thanks, Michaela.